A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I felt like we should have had like sleigh bells in the background since it's Christmas Eve there, the theme music, but oh well, not to be. Merry Christmas in advance to those of you who will be celebrating Christmas tomorrow. We will be off. We will not have a Bearing Arms Gaming Company. Probably very limited posting on the website as well, I got to say, but we'll be back at it on Friday. And we'll pick up Bearing Arms Gaming Company again next Monday. Joining me in just a moment, Mike Sodini, one of the founders of Walk the Talk America, one of my favorite people, good friend of mine. And I will tell you right offhand that when Mike and I get together, it is not a short conversation. So this is a pretty extensive interview / conversation here on today's program, talking about the efforts of Walk the Talk America over the course of this year. And, you know, the reason why I had Mike on, honestly, was because the holidays can be tough for folks. As I told Mike, you know, especially as we get older, right? When you're a kid, hopefully, Christmas is really exciting. It's all about the presents under the tree. Hopefully, it's about the real reason of the season. But, you know, as you get older, there's, I think, Christmas can be bittersweet. This will be my first Christmas without Missy. This will be my third Christmas without my oldest son, Harrison. And, you know, I thought, honestly, that I'd be okay. I was kind of keeping myself busy, trying to make sure that the other kids had a good Christmas. Yeah, I think it's actually going to affect me more than I realized. Starting last night, as I was kind of putting things together, it kind of hit me. So I know that I'm not the only one in this boat. And I just want you to know that, you know, it's okay to talk to somebody. And if you don't have anybody to talk to, you can always reach out to me. My email address is cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. But I don't want anybody to feel alone this Christmas season. And most importantly, I want folks to be in a good space mentally and emotionally this Christmas season. So that was the impetus behind talking with Mike. But I got to say, I heard, and you will hear some really encouraging details about the work that Walk the Talk America is doing. Not just in terms of destigmatizing mental health among gun owners, but destigmatizing gun owners among the mental health community, which I think is crucially important. And again, maybe one of the most valuable things that Walk the Talk America is doing. So with that in mind, grab a cup of coffee, maybe something to eat. If you listen to the whole interview, you'll be here for a little while. And check out our conversation with Mike Sodini from Walk the Talk America. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the program. It's really good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You know, and I told the audience I want to talk about a couple of things. I do want to talk about just, you know, gun owners watching out for each other, looking out for each other during the holiday season, because it can be tough for folks, you know, particularly I think as we get older. When you're a kid, you know, hopefully Christmas is all about the, you know, presents under the trees, and it's just, you know, it's a great time. But as you get older, you start to miss those folks who aren't around. You know, this is going to be my first Christmas without Missy, and I'm sure it's going to be pretty tough. But I also want to talk about the work that Walk the Talk America has done this year, because you guys, I think, continue to punch above your weight. And I'm really excited about the work that you all are doing. As you say, in the right there on the shirt, the intersection of guns and mental health. So can you give us sort of a highlight reel of Walk the Talk America in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, we've expanded. You know, obviously what we want to do is take care of the industry first. We want to be that place where the industry, the firearms community, goes to for mental health resources and help and education. And we've been doing that since 2018. I'm very proud of that, but we've expanded a little bit this year, going into the research side of things. Why that's important for, you know, the firearms industry to know that, or the community to know that, is for decades, every time you think of research, it's something negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're researching the negative side of firearms, and it looks like we're finally turning that corner and starting to work with some I would say academics, like people that work in that side of it, Yale, like, you know, places that historically never would even like sat down and talked with us Now they're saying, hey, look, we'd like to research some of your programs at Walk the Talk America. And we're having a little bit of influence too on the way that they're looking at it. Some of them, they're stuck in the rut of looking at research that same way that we just spoke about, for decades. And now we're saying, look, let's start researching some of the negative outcomes of some of these laws that we think are saving lives, but maybe are feel good legislation. So I'm pretty proud of that, on top of all the other stuff we're doing.
That's pretty amazing. So give me an example of one of these laws that you're talking about.
So, for example, like a ERPA law or red flag law, right? Like all we do is focus on, and when I say we, I'm not talking about the gun community. I'm talking about society. What we do is we focus on how many lives did it save? And we got the guns out of this many people's hands. But on the flip side of that, we don't study, and Walk Talk America has been doing their own research. Now it's not accredited. It's basically just asking gun owners to come forward and answer our questions. And you can go to our website and check out our survey. But what we want to do is say, like, how many people avoid care because of red flag laws or ERPAs? And I'll tell you, I know it for a fact. It's a lot, right? I think it's over half of gun owners that state it from our statistics. But Cam, I got the idea because I have so many people that would call or email Walk Talk America and say, like, hey, I want to get help, but I'm afraid to because of the ERPA law. Like, how do I navigate it? How many people don't call, right? How many people just say, yeah, I'm not even going to go there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I'm glad that you guys are raising this question. And I'm thrilled that there's some academics that are actually interested in taking a look at this because, it was just yesterday. I was, Monday, I was writing a story for Bearing Arms. There was a piece in The Hill about Maine's red flag law and, why Maine's red flag law is so much better than the yellow flag law that was in place before. And one of the main reasons why these academics were opposed to the yellow flag law is that there was a mental health component to it. And, these researchers said, well, that just, it delays taking action. It delays being able to take the guns away. I mean, if somebody's, having a mental health evaluation, they're not in a position to have immediate access to a firearm anyway. But it once again just kind of buttresses the point that red flag laws are not about mental health. There is not a red flag law that I'm aware of in the country that requires any sort of evaluation by a mental health professional before firearms are seized. Nor, by the way, if a judge declares that someone's dangerous, no mental health help is offered to this person.
Right.
They take the guns away and they say, all right, problem solved. Well, no, that's not. I mean, if you've got somebody who's dangerous because of their mental illness, don't we need to help that individual get better? Right. I mean, it boggles my mind. But
I say that all the time. I said when because I'm going to give them credit. A lot of the people that work in the research field, it's not that I think they're anti-gun. I think they're just a little gun ignorant. So they haven't had the chance to sit down with a gun person, right? And maybe that's our fault. Maybe it's their fault, right? Maybe they haven't been so welcoming. Maybe we thought they wouldn't be so welcoming. I don't know. I don't care at this point. But I always say, if I'm not capable of having my firearm, then I shouldn't have my car keys.
Right.
Like we got right. Like, and I think like they can appreciate that. My biggest issue, like you said, is if I'm going to come and take your property away, I'm going to make sure you have an avenue to get help. Not, hey, good luck out there, Cam. Maybe I'll see you in a year and you can have these back if you behave. And then think about what therapist is really going to put their name on that, because I don't know if you're good enough to have your firearm. Unless you say, like, I am going to take my own life, right? Like, who's going to put their license on the line to vouch for somebody who's only okay in that moment? Yeah. You're only okay in that moment. Tomorrow could be a horrible day. We can't see the future. So it's a tough call to make as a therapist or a psychologist. Like, it's very tough. Absolutely.
And I think the same goes for those judges, right? I mean, you're going to err on the side of caution. I think there's a human tendency to want to err on the side of caution. And okay, what happens to me if I allow this person to keep their guns and then something bad happens? So that's going to come back on me. What happens if I take away this person's guns and nothing happens? Even if they didn't really need their guns taken away, no harm is going to come to me as a judge, right? Better safe than sorry. So I think there's a I think it's sort of baked into the red flag cake, right? That the vast majority of these petitions are going to be granted. That it is not necessarily going to be easy to have those rights restored. And, again, the vast majority of red flag laws, yes, they last for 6 months to 12 months, but they can be extended indefinitely, right? Prosecutors can always go back, or the petitioner can always go back and say, I want to renew this. And the process starts all over again. So I'm really glad that you are, again, talking about this, because it's not about ignoring mental health. Right. And that's, I get so frustrated when I hear gun control advocates say, well, you don't want to talk about this. You don't have any solutions. Yeah, we do. They just don't involve red flag laws. Right. So,
Right.
One of the things that I think Walk the Talk America does and does very well is, again, something about, making it possible to have these types of conversations among gun owners. Right. There is, I think, rightfully a stigma attached in some cases to talking about mental health, because, you just talked about these phone calls that you'll get from people who say, I'd like to talk to somebody, but I don't want them, filing a petition and taking my guns away. So, we do as gun owners need to talk about mental health. I mean, gun owners are not immune to mental health challenges. Certainly, firearm-involved suicides are not the only type of suicides that happen, but there's a significant number of suicides in the United States. I don't think that's a gun issue. But again, it's a mental health issue. So let's talk about mental health.
Yeah, I always tell people all the time, the firearm is where like efficiency meets convenience, right? When it comes to suicide, that's it. We all know like 100%, you want to do it 100%, stand in front of a train, right? But with a train, there's time and space between that walk to maybe something can change. A firearm is right there. There's that convenience and then efficiency. But it's not the gun's fault. Absolutely not. The gun does not make you more suicidal. It's what's going on up here. For us to be able to have that conversation with them, and this is where, it's just like SHOT Show. Like I was at that conference in Phoenix like a couple of months ago, the harm reduction conference, and gun violence harm reduction conference. I hate that term, but they say firearm harm reduction, and I think we were a big part of getting them to change that, which is kind of cool. But it's just like SHOT Show. Like a lot of good conversations come at the bar, or the social gatherings, and it's really fun to be able to kind of challenge the thought process and see them work. So I'll give you like one prime example. We're working with somebody out of Colorado who works on their red flag law, and obviously in an ideal world we'd be able to get them to get rid of the red flag law, but he has taken a vested interest in the things that we're saying, and he's trying to improve. He's not making any promises, but he's trying to improve on that red flag law. And the other day he wrote me an email and said, what do you think about this concept? And the concept was that if you got red flagged, you were assigned somebody who could like walk you through the process and link you to a mental health clinician, link you to an attorney. Right. And I looked at that and I said, if you're going to have a bad law, this is a step in the right direction, right? Because how many people just don't know what to do when that process is kicked in and they've taken your firearms, right? So, if anything, we can kind of get them to see like you have to improve on these things if you're going to have these horrible laws that prevent people from getting care, which that's what I believe. I want you to make them the best they can be with due process.
Absolutely. And I mean, that would be an improvement, right? I mean, that's one of the knocks against red flag laws is that they do lack due process. In a lot of states, you're not even, if you can't afford an attorney, you're on your own, right? Because this takes place in civil court. So public defenders are typically not available. I've seen some states that have actually acknowledged, okay, that's an issue, right? We do need, somebody does need to have actual legal representation, which is another, step in the right direction. This is, I mean, it's funny, like you can't let perfect be the enemy of good, right? So, are we opposed to red flag laws? I am. Are they on the books in 23 states now? Yep. So you got to deal with that reality, right? And the reality is in some of these blue states, these red flag laws aren't going away. You can challenge them in court. Second Amendment Foundation has an ongoing case based out of Maryland, I believe. But I mean, I'll be perfectly honest with you, Mike. The Rahimi decision, the Supreme Court said You can temporarily take somebody's guns away if a court finds them to be dangerous. That was not about red flag laws, but that language is going to be cited in every challenge to a red flag law. And I think honestly, I think we're going to fight an uphill battle, legally speaking, against red flag laws. I think we should absolutely have that fight. But I think we also need to strategize about what do we do if these laws remain in place. And what you're doing is exactly that, right? I mean, how do you make a bad law better? How do you make a bad law less onerous to the gun owners who are involved? And due process is a part of that. But again, getting back to the underlying issue of why these red flag laws supposedly exist, right? If somebody's deemed to be dangerous, well, yeah, the state should absolutely be working to get them the help that they need. That to me seems like a common sense gun safety measure, right?
Yeah, it's take for example the Rob Reiner case that just happened. I know that's been hot in the news, right? Look at his son. His son obviously was going through crisis. Something was wrong. Nobody called or did anything, which I can understand that when people don't want to get involved in other people's family affairs or they don't want to have somebody arrested, but he should have been 5150. 5150 is what they do in California when you're acting erratic. Now, the thing about 5150 is as soon as you start acting normal, even if it's 15 minutes after it's been enacted, you're allowed to walk, right? But that guy, Nick, his son, I mean, he didn't have a firearm and he was a danger to society. Taking his firearm wouldn't have stopped what would have happened there. You know what I mean? I know these are anecdotal stories that people don't want to hear them, but anecdotal stories sometimes are enough to scare people away from getting help, right? They hear that one person got screwed over. Because like with red flag laws, I say to a lot of the researchers that I talk to, have you ever met anybody that's been red flagged? And a lot of them say no. And I said, I've met 3 people that have been red flagged, and all 3 of them said they shouldn't have been red flagged. Right. So now you have the researcher saying, hey, these laws save so many lives. And I'm like, how do you know that? Like, did the person say it's kind of it's a nuanced conversation to have with them. And it's been very interesting to see the different answers.
It's interesting you bring that up. I had I haven't written about this, I haven't talked about it on the show, but I had a brief email exchange with the author, one of the authors of that study that says, for every, I think it's every 13 to 21 red flag petitions that are issued, one suicide is prevented. And that statistic always bothered me because what about the other cases, right? I mean, what about the other 12 to 20 cases where did those people commit suicide? Were they never a threat to themselves or anybody else to begin with? Like, what about those individuals? Because that's the bulk of people who get red flagged then, according to this research. And so I emailed the author of that study and I asked him, I was like, what about those other people? And he said, oh, no, that's not really what it means. I had a bunch of, quite frankly, academic gobbledygook that I kind of understood, that much. But again, you're right. It's impossible really to say that a red flag law, we know a red flag petition would have prevented something from happening, right? You can say, that maybe the preponderance of evidence suggests that. But in a lot of these cases, we really don't know what would have happened had a red flag petition not been issued. And, the individuals that you've talked to, the individual who was involved in this lawsuit in Maryland, who basically was alleged he was red flagged by a very vindictive public official with whom he had been squabbling for years over his property. There are those anecdotal stories, but they're stories from real people who've been really impacted by this. And if nothing else, the fact that, you're presenting this information to these academics and reminding them this isn't all hypothetical, right? This isn't just an academic exercise, that there are real lives involved here. I think that's valuable work that Walk the Talk America is doing.
Yeah, and it's good to connect to the people. We recently on our podcast had someone on, someone named Kelly Sutcliffe on. She's become a good friend of mine because we've talked so much about this situation. But like, take for example, the magazine capacity law in New Jersey. She is a living, breathing example of how having 2 extra rounds in a magazine in her firearm got her in so much trouble So the situation was her husband tried to kill her one night, um, beat her to the brink of death. He got arrested, taken away. Well, while he's arrested, he says she owns a firearm because he knew that he had never changed out the magazine when, you know, it was a 12 round and it's supposed to only be 10.
Yeah.
Well, the prosecutor, the district attorney came out and they confiscated her firearm, and she got in trouble for having a firearm with 2 extra rounds. So they disarmed somebody that literally needed their firearm at that time. And the irony of it is she would never have used her firearm on her husband. She loved her husband, and her husband was the perfect husband until that moment. And it gets even more ironic. If you ever want to have her on your show, you got to. The story is bananas, but now she's fighting to try to get her gun rights back in the state of New Jersey, and they have required her to go see a therapist. Well, guess what she does for a living?
Oh my God.
She's a therapist. So like, you can't write the comedy in there. It's a horrible situation, but you know, it's made her a 2A advocate now. Like she is. So once again, we talk about these laws. What are they really solving, and who are they punishing? And all it takes is one anecdotal story. And then a bunch of gun owners say, well, I'm not going to do that, or I'm scared to do that, or I'm not going to hand my gun over to a friend because I'm going to get in trouble if I do that. Like, and this is what they need to understand. They need to understand that this world is not a cartoon world. And I say that in a nice way. I understand everybody wants peace and harmony, but that is a cartoon world. That's not real. That's not realistic. In the world, there's a lot of evil, there's a lot of bad, and people want to feel safe. They want to be protected, and they don't want to rely on other people to protect them. And that's not too much to ask. And I think researchers need to understand that. And we're getting there.
Well, again, I'm glad that you guys are putting forth this effort. I'm glad that you're seeing some success, you know, and you know, what's interesting is, I mean, as you're talking about this, it sounds like a lot of the work that Walk the Talk America is doing. Obviously, again, you're showing up at these conferences, you're there, you're still putting, you know, mental health, I don't want to say advocacy, but resources, material, you know, in the boxes that people get when they buy guns. But I mean, Mike, again, it sounds like a lot of the successes that you're seeing are those casual conversations, or maybe not even the casual conversations, but are those conversations that take place on the sidelines of these conferences, the one-on-one relationships that you're developing with academics and helping them to see the light and get a different perspective, right? I mean, I don't know. We talked about the challenges of quantifying the success of a red flag law. I don't know how you can quantify that. You know, I had X number of conversations with X number of academics this past year that led to, you know, this outcome. But it sounds like, you know, change really is happening in a space where change is desperately needed.
Yeah, I think so. You know, at the conference, not only I was there to attend, and it really was special for me because it was at Arizona State in Tempe, and I went to Arizona State. So it was kind of cool to be invited to come back and speak at my college. The month before that, I was a keynote speaker at the Rutgers Gun Violence Prevention Conference. Think about that. They had the closing keynote speaker was the gun guy. Like, that's, you know what I mean? Like, we've come a long way. But, you know, at that conference in Tempe, we had a table. We have a new program. Every year we're coming out with a new program, right? We're trying to do something new. And I always tell people, Walk the Talk America, we're not supposed to put out an album every year. We still got to do the work that we're supposed to do. But we had a table. We have a program called Roots, which stands for Responsible Ownership, Outreach, Technology, and Safety. And what we were doing was showcasing the safety products that come from the firearms industry that are the latest and greatest when it comes to technology. And our table, even though they buried us in the back, there was, you know, when you say measure success, we had so many people come to the table and they're like, why aren't you guys out in the front? And I said, tell them that, you know, because these products, I mean, we ignore these products in the firearms industry, right? These products get ignored, but there's some really cool things. And it's not because we don't like safety. It's just, A lot of these products come from companies, they only make one SKU, so they get ignored by the distributors, they kind of get ignored by the dealers, and they certainly get ignored by the manufacturing reps, right, who represent gun lines, because you only got a finite amount of time to sell products, right? So you're not going to be like, oh, and we have this contraption that goes on your slide that makes it so that your gun's ready. But the 5 companies that were represented there are Kinesium, Gun Alert, Regal, Bosslock, and VeriSafety, and all of them have a different type of product, but it was a hit. I mean, there was a lot of researchers that were like, "Oh my God, there's more things out there than just a cable lock, right? Like, there's more things out there than just a biometric safe, right? Like, that's about the extent of where their knowledge goes."
Okay.
So it was good to bring these products to show them. Once again, I'm big on showing the rest of the world outside of the 2A community how much stuff there is there and how much we do. If that makes sense.
And it's so easy, I think, for us to get this myopic perspective that, well, they should know about this stuff already, right? We know about this stuff, although in some cases we don't know about this stuff. But
Right.
we forget how siloed people are these days, and you really do have to go out and kind of shake them a little bit and say, pay attention to this. Like, you don't know this, you haven't seen this perspective. And again, I mean, that's really valuable work. And the amazing thing is, like, they're listening, right? They're not walking by the table. They're not making smart ass comments as they walk by the table. They're interested in this, which again, I think is a very good thing.
Yeah, no, this year, especially, the climate was so much warmer. So, this is the second year I've attended. First year I was there to speak. There were still some people that you could tell were not sure, right? Like, because I was the very first person from the firearms industry to speak at the event. This year, I had the table and I had the speaking engagement at ASU on Tuesday, but then we had the rest of the week at the conference. But I feel people were more open to the idea of, let's sit down and break bread with this guy. Or, I had a lot of people said, yeah, I saw you last year, but I didn't get a chance to talk to you now sitting down. So it's definitely, the tides are turning. I think this is a very positive thing. And this is the thing that kills me about it. I feel like GOA, Second Amendment Foundation, they're like on a battlefield, right? Like, they're out there like on a battlefield. Like, this is, they're the ones getting these things overturned, shooting them down, challenging them. I'm coming at it a different way. It's like more strategic. It's more like meetings and things like that. But I feel like the work we're doing is just as important, because if we can come this way on this side and get them over here, and then we have the people fighting the fight to knock that stuff down, we're hitting them twofold. We're looking like the good guys because we kind of look like we care more, and providing the solutions, the alternatives. You can no longer say all we do is throw up our hands and say Second Amendment.
Yeah.
I love it. It's like, to me, I feel like the work that we do, well, it'll never get recognized like the guys on the battlefield, which I understand that, because I bow down to them too, right? Like, they're the ones that are fighting the laws. But I feel like our work here is just as important.
It is. Because, when we talk about the threats to our Second Amendment rights, obviously there's the legislative front, right? There's the regulatory front. There's the culture war, and the attempt to denormalize gun ownership. And I'm not sure where, academia / mental health falls. I mean, it kind of touches in all of those different areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is. Look, there's so much money invested in anti-gun research. The Bloomberg School of Center for Gun Violence Solutions at Johns Hopkins University is just one of them. Every town gave almost $200,000 to Duke University's Firearms Law Center last year. Right? I mean, there's so much money in anti-gun academia. And, what you're doing, again, it's not just that it's window dressing, right? I mean, one thing if this was just a smokescreen for GOA and SAF to go out and litigate. But it's not. I mean, this is a genuine movement to not only counter what the anti-gun academics are saying, but as you say, to provide answers, right? It's not just about
Right.
saying no. It's about, here's what we're saying yes to. And I think that makes such a huge difference.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's exciting. I was on a conference call the other day. It was a Zoom meeting with a bunch of different organizations that work in suicide prevention, or what they would say solutions to negative outcomes of firearms. And there was a lady in the chat. It looked like I paid her. She literally out of nowhere, like in the chat, because they were talking about trusted messengers, and and I rarely share those things. So if you go to like my Instagram, I actually shared it on my LinkedIn, everywhere, because it really meant a lot to me. Because she goes, Mike is the epitome of the trusted messenger. She said, my mom suffers from severe dementia, and she had a firearm in the house, and I couldn't convince my brother, because he's part of the 2A gun culture crowd, to take away her firearm. And basically said he heard Mike on a podcast, and we came up with a plan to remove the firearm from the house, because I guess she's at the point where she shouldn't have it. But she said if it wasn't for hearing, probably this show, right? Like hearing us have this type of conversation, to say like, no, he would have never changed his mind. She couldn't get through to him. So that made me feel good, because it's like, we don't want negative outcomes of firearms. So we don't want people that have severe dementia to have access to a firearm. We don't. People think we want to arm everybody, and that's just not true. We just want to get the people that can have guns. We want them to keep their guns, and the people that need help, we want them to get help and then return to their guns. Right? Like we don't want people to have their rights violated, and people need to understand that. I think that there's a misconception with the way we've been portrayed in the media over the years, that all we want to do is arm people. We don't really care. We don't have any solutions. We just hide behind the Second Amendment. It's just not true. Most gun owners I know, and I've been told this recently by quite a few people that were on the other side, that said, like, you were the only person who really reached out and cared when I had a tragedy happen to me. We need to change the narrative of how people think of you guys. And so I'm proud of that. I really am. Both you and I have suffered loss this last year. It's been very tough. I mean, for you, I can't even imagine. But we are caring people. We are concerned. We're protectors by nature. That's why we own firearms. So,
Yeah.
I'm proud to say that we finally got to this area, this space, and we're doing really well. And I hope people understand it. I hope our side gets it. That it's wins I feel like they don't see or know about, right? It's like, because none of this is going to make the news, right? Like, hey,
Right.
gun people and academics came together and actually were civil and were working.
Right.
Like, it's not sexy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe if, Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson all stay quiet for a week, maybe then it becomes a story, but I don't know. But I do share your hopes, and I hope that, again, gun owners and Second Amendment advocates understand how important this is, right? Because we're never going to. I mean, the gun control debate is always going to be a part of politics. It's no one side is ever going to win completely. It's just not. So we're going to keep having these conversations. We're going to keep having these debates. We're going to keep having these arguments over legislation and regulations and things of that nature. So we've got to be able to play the long game, and what you're doing at Walk the Talk America is a part of that. But it's I see it not just as that outreach to the mental health advocates and the researchers, many of whom may be anti-gun, but it's also the outreach to gun owners, right? Because there is some resistance to your message among gun owners too, right? That, you're just putting a two-way friendly face on gun control or red flag laws. And so there's work that has to be done to dispel those myths too. And maybe the next time we have you on the program, maybe we can focus on that side of the equation a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, there's still people that, they see guns and mental health together and they're like, stop blaming the gun, man. Like, you know what I mean? They don't
Right.
understand. I love being able to go to these conferences and unapologetically say no to red flag laws. And then I tell people all the time, if you want to know why, we post it on our website and we give you alternatives. So I'm not just sitting there saying it's a problem, it's not going to work, full stop. I'm saying full stop. Check out what we suggest. Let me focus your energy somewhere else, right? Like there's so many things that we can focus your energy on. So absolutely. I love representing the firearms community philosophically, right? Like historically, if you wanted to back a mental health organization or suicide prevention organization, you probably had to back somebody that didn't feel the exact same way you do about your firearm and your rights. With Walk Talk America, you don't miss anything. Like you don't have to compromise on your belief system. You don't have to say, yeah, well, that's where we disagree. You get to be like, I support this and I love everything that they're saying because it's exactly what I say. So
Absolutely. Hey, Mike, listen, I love talking with you. I'm such a huge fan of Walk the Talk America. I literally have like a minute 45 left before we're cut off by the technology god. So I want to just wish you and yours a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I want to
likewise.
thank you for your friendship throughout the year. And again, all of the work that you're doing at Walk the Talk America. WTTA.org is the website, correct?
Yep. And at Walk the Talk US on all social media platforms. So
Okay. Mike Sodini, thank you again for your time today. I know we'll be talking again very soon in the future, but really appreciate it, my friend.
yeah, likewise. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
You too. My thanks to Mike for joining me on the program. Looking forward again to talking to him once again in the new year. Let's get to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivist report. Recidivist report, I gotta say, this is absolutely bizarre. It comes from our friends at CWB Chicago. The headline: Fired Markham cop, Sioux City police chief, who ordered her to release a convicted murderer found with a gun. Oftentimes we talk, I think the vast majority of times on our recidivist report, we're talking about plea deals, judicial decisions that are inexplicable. In this case, it's the lack of an arrest. That is at the heart of this story. So CWB Chicago first reported on this officer who was fired after reporting the fact that her police chief told her to let a convicted felon go after she caught him with a gun. Kayla Heller is her name. She claims that she was terminated after reporting to prosecutors in the Illinois State Police that Markham, Illinois Police Chief Jack Genius, yeah, this is his real name, ordered the release of a man named Tyrone Muhammad after she discovered a loaded gun inside his Chrysler 300 center console. Muhammad was stopped on October the 8th because his vehicle's plates were suspended for lack of insurance. Muhammad was convicted of murder in 1994. He served 20 years in prison before he was released. Should Muhammad have regained his right to keep and bear arms? Arguably so. Has he? No. And so it does remain illegal for him to possess a firearm under both the state and federal law. Muhammad runs a violence interruption program called Ex-Cons for Community and Social Change. He is also running for U.S. Senate to replace Dick Durbin. So that's a bigger problem here, right? I mean, obviously now you've got to wonder, did the police chief not want Muhammad arrested because of his nascent political career, and again, because of his work as a community gun violence prevention activist, right? So according to the lawsuit that has been filed by Heller, started working as a probationary patrol officer in December of 2024. She was on a 1-year probationary period under the department's collective bargaining agreements. But she says her performance reviews were described as excellent. So she shows up at the police station with Muhammad and then was told that Jack Genius, the police chief there in Markham, had ordered Muhammad's release and had directed that his vehicle be returned without incurring any towing fees even, which, I mean, that's pretty extraordinary, right? CWB Chicago confirmed this, by the way, through records obtained in a Freedom of Information Act request. Heller issued Muhammad a ticket for suspended registration, and the complaint says that the gun was released to one of Muhammad's associates last month, which I'm not even sure how that works under Illinois law, quite honestly. But Heller says she reported the incident the next morning to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office as well as the Illinois State Police. She alleges in her lawsuit that Markham Police command staff questioned her about why she did so during what she describes as an interrogation last month, that she says failed to comply with the requirements of the Illinois Uniform Peace Officers Disciplinary Act. She says that she was questioned extensively about her whistleblower activity rather than any alleged misconduct. She was asked whether other officers encouraged her to go outside the chain of command. She was specifically asked extensively, again, according to her complaint, about whether Markham Sergeant Matt Carey had encouraged her to contact prosecutors or played any role in her whistleblower activity. According to the complaint, Carey had previously expressed an interest in succeeding Jack Genius as the police chief. The lawsuit also claims that Genius subsequently demoted Sergeant Carey from administrative sergeant to patrol sergeant after learning that Heller had communicated with him on the morning after Muhammad's arrest. Lawsuit claims that the demotion was retaliatory, was tied both to Heller's whistleblower complaint as well as Carey's perceived challenge to Jack Genius's leadership. CWB Chicago says December 8th, they sent an email to Jack Genius, let him know, hey, we're working on a story about your decision to release Muhammad. We've got a number of questions for you. He never replied, according to CWB Chicago. But later that day, on December the 8th, the same day that that email was sent by CWB Chicago, Heller was ordered to report to Genius's office, where she was told that she's being fired for failure to successfully complete her probationary period, which was set to expire like 2 weeks later. The complaint says that her termination was effective immediately. The department-wide email later announced that she was no longer employed and was barred from police facilities without authorization. Following day, she says she was asked to return to the police station to sign a backdated resignation memo, which her attorneys say has no legal effect because she'd already been fired at that point. So she is alleging retaliation and violation of the Illinois Whistleblower Act, violation of her First Amendment rights, wrongful termination, violations of the Illinois Wage Payment and Collection Act, saying that the city had also failed to pay more than $10,000 in accrued vacation and sick time after she was fired. CWB Chicago reached out to Jack Genius and a publicist working for the city of Markham about the lawsuit. Again, no response whatsoever. We'll see what the legal response is, but the bigger question is, again, why did the police chief in Markham, Illinois, why did this genius, Jack Genius, why did Chief Genius say that a guy who was convicted of murder 31 years ago, who did 20 years in prison, who's not legally allowed to possess a firearm, should not only not be arrested, but have his gun returned, or at least given to an associate, despite the fact that he's not able to own it legally? I mean, and by the way, I realize there's a lot of crime in Chicago for the papers to cover, but I haven't seen any mention of this in the Chicago Tribune or the Chicago Sun-Times. If they've covered it, certainly hasn't been big news. So kudos to Tim Heckey at CWB Chicago for really giving this story the attention that it deserves. Because it seems like something is seriously off there in Markham, Illinois. And again, you can make the argument that Mr. Muhammad should have his rights restored. Again, I don't know anything about the guy. I think he should have the opportunity to have his rights restored, certainly. But the bottom line is he can't legally possess a firearm right now. So why did the police chief let him go? I mean, that's the simple question. And I don't think we have even a simple answer from the chief of police at this point. On to today's armed citizen story. And again, this one takes some wild turns. You know, you may have seen the headlines earlier this month about a shooting on the campus at Kentucky State University. Suspect was arrested, initially charged with murder of a 19-year-old student, charged with assault for shooting another student there. Well, as it turns out, Grand jury took a look at the evidence here and decided not to indict the suspect in this shooting that took place earlier this month. His attorneys, by the way, have been arguing from the get-go that he acted in self-defense. Jacob Bard is the individual's name. I don't normally name victims here, but in this case, Bard was charged criminally, and based on, again, the accounts of his attorneys, but also based on the grand jury's decision, it sounds like the accounts of his attorneys were largely substantiated. Mr. Bard was acting to protect himself and his family from a mob of violent attackers on the campus of Kentucky State University. 19-year-old Dejon Fox was shot and killed. Another student was injured during this mob violence, essentially. So the background, according to Bard's attorneys, is that Bard's son had been subjected to a series of escalating violent incidents there on campus by a fairly large group of students. And it got to the point where the son feared for his safety. So his parents decided, we're going to withdraw him from school. We're going to take him out of school. Because of the threats that have been communicated to his son, Joseph Bard asked campus police to accompany his family to the dorm as they removed their son's belongings, right? Well, according to their account, and I'm just going to quote from this statement, upon the officer and Bard family reaching the entrance, this mob of individuals, many of whom not students of the university, wearing ski masks, hoods, and otherwise concealing their faces, rushed out of the dorm, past an armed KSU police officer, and began violently assaulting Jacob's family and others present. Jacob and his family retreated approximately 40 feet while being physically struck until his son was slammed into the concrete and had multiple people on top of him beating his head against the pavement with feet and fists. The officer on scene had completely lost control of the situation, and while Jacob and his wife ran towards their son, the officer was retreating further from the erupting violence. In the chaos, Jacob tried to physically pull the individuals off of his son, was struck himself, and when he was unable to pull those individuals off of his son, and seeing his son in imminent danger of death and serious physical injury, Jacob then drew his firearm, shot two individuals who were actively and viciously beating his child. Jacob immediately then dropped the weapon when his son was able to escape the violence. I don't think I would have dropped the weapon, by the way, if there's a big mob around. I think I would have held on to my gun so that they couldn't get a hold of it. But police, again, were right there, right? And as soon as Bard shot the two of the attackers, apparently that officer drew his gun, pointed it at Mr. Bard, and Bard surrendered to police at gunpoint. Bard, according to his attorneys, was violently kicked in the face by an individual involved in the assault against his family as he was surrendering to the police. They argued that his actions were absolutely justified under the law and were the only measure that prevented his son's death or serious injury. So again, it sounds like the grand jury believed Mr. Bard's account because they declined to indict him on charges of murder or assault, believing that he acted in self-defense. We don't know all of the evidence that the prosecutors presented here, but again, the big question is, why did prosecutors present any evidence? I mean, if in fact this played out the way that Bard's attorneys allege, Joseph Bard should never have been charged in the first place. And in the wake of this shooting, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear talked about how we need to pray that we don't have to live in a world like this. Every town released a statement saying that this was a senseless tragedy. Students shouldn't live in fear on campus. Both statements, by the way, absolutely true. This was a senseless tragedy, and students shouldn't live in fear on campus. But you know what? It wasn't Mr. Bard who put the fear of God in the students. Apparently, it's this mob of students who have taken control of the campus that are causing students to live in fear. That created this senseless tragedy. Now, I wrote about this at Bearing Arms today, and I said, I don't expect Andy Beshear or Everytown to offer any sort of mea culpa now that the facts have been known and Mr. Bard is not facing any charges. Nor, by the way, do I expect Andy Bashir to order any sort of investigation into what the hell is going on the campus at Kentucky State University. But I do hope that the Republican lawmakers who have a majority in the legislature will try to find out what is happening there on the campus. Because, again, it sounds like officials have lost complete control. Oh, by the way, Bard's attorneys also allege that the mother of the 19-year-old who was shot and killed has openly called for Bard's son to be murdered as retaliation, and has publicly called for gangs like the Vice Lords to take the lead in killing Bard's son. But she's not facing any charges yet. So again, I ask, what the hell's happening here in Kentucky? Why are prosecutors going after this man who defended his son? Why are they not going after the woman who allegedly is now calling for Bard's son's murder? And will officials investigate the lawlessness and the mob violence that is taking place on the campus of Kentucky State University? Again, I doubt the governor will, but I sure hope the legislature does. Finally today, our good deed of the day, in the right place. We need it after these last two stories, don't we? In the right place at the right time, we're able to do the right thing. A off-duty NYPD officer who saved their neighbor's year-old child from choking to death at a home on Long Island. This from the New York Daily News, reporting that Officer Freddie Serpa was at his home in Elmont when his neighbor ran up to his front door carrying her infant daughter around 2 o'clock in the afternoon on December the 7th. Serpa immediately started employing life-saving measures, stuck his finger in the girl's mouth, trying to dislodge whatever was stuck in her throat. You know, as we talked about, I think it was yesterday, actually, on the program, you can't do the Heimlich on an infant. You just can't. So those heavy swats to the back are what's recommended to try to release anything that might be lodged in their throat. And that's what Freddie Serpa did. He couldn't get anything out with his fingers, so he ended up kind of swatting her on the back until she was able to breathe again. Serpa, a relatively new member of the NYPD. He joined the force last October. He's assigned to the 43rd Precinct in the Bronx. And again, home, off duty, back on December 7th. But in the right place, at the right time, willing able to do the right thing to save a child in need. And Officer Freddie Serpa, we certainly thank you for your very, very good deed. All right, again, I want to thank you for being a part of this program, not just today, but every day that you're able to watch or listen. It absolutely means a lot to me, and I greatly appreciate you. Again, if you're going to be celebrating Christmas tomorrow, have a very Merry Christmas. I certainly hope that you and your family have a wonderful day. And as I said at the beginning of the program, if it's not a really wonderful day for you, if you're struggling, if you're having a hard time, don't be afraid to reach out to somebody. And if you don't have anybody to reach out to, like I said, you can always reach out to me, cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. I'll be checking my email tomorrow, maybe even be doing some work to keep my mind occupied, but also spending some time with my family as well. Anyway, we will see you back here on Monday for another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.